Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the Extended Disc 30-minute webinar. My name is Christina, and I'm one of the senior trainers here at Extended Disc. I have here my guest once again is my boss, Markku Kauppanen, President and CEO of Extended Disc North America. Welcome.
Thank you, Christina. Good morning.
Good morning. Again, our one-time, once-a-month meeting. Today's topic is going to be don't overuse your strength. Now, I just want to remind you guys, if you didn't get a chance to listen to our last webinar, it was, to me, a really fun webinar. We got a lot of great response, a lot of positive response on it, on managing millennials. But now, of course, a new webinar comes about, and we need to pick a new one. So, Markku, why did you pick this particular topic?
Well, this topic comes up all the time when we do, let's say, extended this the trainer session or the certification sessions. People ask, what are some of the things that really might be holding my performance back? But probably more often it comes in, Christina, you know this better than I do because you spend your days helping our clients either prepare for a training session or a coaching session. A lot of times you go over reports of participants, perhaps that can you help with this particular person? There's some roadblocks to his or her success. And what most commonly really is holding us back is not so much our development areas, but it's really when we are overusing our strengths. We are using the behaviors that are comfortable to us so much that they actually are becoming our greatest liabilities.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when our clients and our employees are coming to us, they're not really thinking about, oh, is it my strengths that I'm overusing? So it's kind of an aha, I think, for everyone here. So we can go back and really help our clients that way.
That's right.
Sorry. Okay.
All right.
So just kind of give us an overview. What is it about strengths? I mean, what are strengths and what are the challenges to our strengths?
Well, strengths, of course, those are our strengths, and we need to make sure we learn to capitalize on those strengths. We don't want to focus on our development areas only. But like most things, strengths really have two sides to it. And one of the things about our strengths is that we tend to overlook our strengths. And it's, I don't know, interesting if I know you've seen this, but I think a lot of the audience members have seen people review the extended disc report for the first time. And it's kind of fun to see their body language. They are nodding their head, they're shaking their head. But if you really pay attention, you tend to notice that where people pay a lot of attention are actually their development areas. And I believe that we are conditioned to really focus on where we get things wrong, so to speak. Of course, in disc model, there's no good or bad, right or wrong.
Right.
But when we are looking at the report, the development areas are those things that we are not so good at. It's like being back in school and we get the test back from the teacher. We focus on the things that we did not get right. Or when we get our 360 feedback report from others, we tend to kind of glance over when we get those great ratings and rave reviews from others. We want to find out where we fell short. Where are the low scores? And we start thinking, I wonder who gave me that low score. Or when we look at the comments that people write, we tend to kind of take those positive comments with just, we wouldn't even pay that much attention to them. We want to know where the bad comments are, and that's what really we
get fixated. Even if it's not the majority, we still get fixated on the things that we fall short of.
That's right. So we focus on the development areas and we overlook our strength. And the second thing is that, and it's a little bit different, we seem to take our strengths for granted, meaning that, let's say I'm an S style and I'm a very persistent, that's a great strength to have, and I could really use that to my advantage. But sometimes we tend to assume that everybody has that strength. And we don't realize that there are other people who will love to be persistent as well. I'm just using it as an example. And we all have these wonderful strengths that we assume everybody has. But that's not the case. Most people will love to have the strengths that you have. And we want to make sure that we don't we don't take these strengths for granted. And the reason we tend to overlook our strengths and take them for granted is really that we just tend to autopilot. And this really is the biggest challenge about behavioral change. It's so much easier, so much more comfortable to let the autopilot take over. It's like the pilot of the plane, just switching the autopilot on, the computer takes over. it's easier. We don't have to focus anymore. And the autopiloting, in essence, is when we are in a comfort zone. Mm-hmm. It is comfortable to us. But when we are in a comfort zone, when we are autopiloting, we are forgetting to really pay attention to how we should modify our behavior to become more successful. And when we're in autopilot, the challenge is that because we are comfortable with certain behaviors, those strengths, we begin to overuse them. Obviously, that's a topic for our webinar. But when we overuse our strengths, they really become our greatest liabilities. And by the way, the reason that happens, there are several of them, but some of the most significant ones are that we feel stress, we feel the pressure, when we are tired. Those things kind of are the emotional things that happen, and we might get angry, we might get frustrated, we simply are physically tired. And then it's a lot easier to be on autopilot, not modify behavior. And greater the pressures and greater the frustration is, not only do we only use our strengths, but we begin to use them so much that they actually show as our kind of a negative sides of our behavioral style, whatever that this style may be.
Right. So just in summary, you're just saying oftentimes we are not self-aware of what our strengths are, or we make assumptions that our strengths don't stand out. Everybody has them. And we kind of go in our natural mode, which is autopiloting.
That's exactly it, Christina. So we are not stopping and thinking, how should I modify my behavior? Mm-hmm. How do I work on those development areas? We need to work on those. But also, how do I use my strengths to a degree that they are beneficial?
Yeah. So, I know we always think, like you said, we think of strengths as positive, but strengths themselves can hold us back, or can almost be like a trap for us, right?
That's true. And that's the reason for that is really that ultimately that changing behavior is difficult. It is easier to autopilot, like we just talked. And the reason it also takes energy to change. So why do it? And more often we are focused on what we are doing and not focusing on how we are doing it. Mm-hmm. We are focusing on the task, or we are focusing on what I'm trying to accomplish. But often we would get much more better results if we also were to focus how to do it. And mm-hmm. how to do is the behavioral modification. And interestingly enough, it becomes even more challenging for people who are successful, excuse me, because successful individuals think, hey, I'm successful, why should I change?
Right.
I'm doing well, hey, why bother? But a lot of times what happens is that we are actually kind of delusional if we are successful. and because we are delusional, we think that we are successful because of the way we behave. Mm-hmm. I behave this way, these are the results I'm getting, I must be getting these results because I'm behaving that way. In reality, a lot of times we're actually in denial because sometimes we are successful in spite of ourselves. And again, if we stop, think, and realize that we need to modify behavior, think about how I need to adjust, be very present about my behavioral modification and mindful about those, then we can really increase our success.
That's a great distinction. Instead of because of behaviors, think of it as in spite of behaviors, in terms of why we sometimes put ourselves as someone who is successful.
So, and it's so common with successful people. It happens all the time, and you see it all the time. Just on Monday, I got a call from one of our clients, and he was working with a sales team, mm-hmm. and in particular focusing on the sales manager who was new to this role. I think he said it was 2 months or so, a couple of months at the most. And the salespeople found him very abrasive. Well, this individual, he was a DI profile, so and have a very successful track record of being a sales manager in other organizations in the past. So there's a good chance that this person believes that, hey, I'm successful. So now he comes to a new role. He's not getting the reaction from the salespeople that he's expecting, mm-hmm. probably feeling frustrated, probably feeling some pressure from his boss to deliver results. Mm-hmm. And most likely what was happening, he was overusing his strengths. Rather than being direct, maybe he was very abrasive. And that was one of the terms or adjectives that the salespeople used about this new manager. He's abrasive. So this person was overusing his strengths to a point where he was holding back his success.
So, obviously we're starting to understand what strengths are and how they can hold us back, but a little more specific?
Well, In simplest terms, I call it the two effect. And the two effect is this. No matter what your style is, we use some attributes to describe your style. If you are, let's say, you're a D, you might be competitive. You're an I, you are talkative. If you're an S, you are laid back. And if you're C, you are analytical. Mm-hmm. All wonderful traits. However, when we are overusing our strengths, we use them too much. So add the word to, T-O-O, front of any of those adjectives that describe you or anybody else. When you or they are overusing their strengths, they are being too direct, too talkative, too laid back, or too analytical. And in the report, extended this report, it's really simple to identify those behaviors. They show up throughout the report, but I'm going to focus on this one part where we are actually looking at somebody's strengths. We're looking at Suzanne's report here, and she has some fantastic strengths to use and capitalize on. But if she overuses them, just like for us, for Suzanne, these become her liabilities. So, for example, she dares to take risk, or she wants to be the best. Well, it's not really difficult to see if you take that too far, how those can become challenges. If you are engaged in too risky behavior, or if you become too competitive in every situation, guess what? You are not going to, or in this case, Suzanne is not going to get the results she would like to get. She's not getting the results she's looking for. And what happens next is pressure sets in, frustration sets in. And what happens? We get emotional. Suzanne gets emotional. And instead of being aware of how I should modify my behavior, Suzanne is actually likely to go the wrong way. She's likely to amplify that behavior, not thinking about how to behave, how to modify. And instead of making positive type of behavioral adjustments, she begins to become even too much of herself. And those strengths, amplifying those strengths, becomes even a greater liability for her.
Yeah, I think the saying is, under stress, we become more of who we are, which can be good or bad. But I know in my training too, I sometimes talk about, we look at these strengths and think about, how can we, how do we tend to show up under pressure when you put that word, the to effect in front of it. But also as a manager or a coach, sometimes we can look at it the other way. It's like it can give you insight when you're looking at these pressures and overuse of strengths, that when they're exhibiting it, they may be under pressure.
That's a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because so far in the webinar, we've been really talking about ourselves, how to modify behavior. But let's for a moment assume that I'm a manager, and one of my employees is exhibiting these strengths a little bit too far. Let's say they are C-style and they're becoming too analytical and being too precise. If I'm aware of what's happening, this is a great kind of a clue for me that something may be going on. It may be, maybe I'm doing something in a way that I'm frustrating this employee. Maybe there's something else that's creating pressure, or just an environment that is not conducive for this employee to really succeed and provide the performance that they're capable of. So as a manager, now I can uncover some of these issues and maybe remove some of those roadblocks. So it's not only being self-aware when this is happening to me, but I can also begin to recognize when it's happening to others. Also at a team level, we see this often, and especially in teams where you have a lot of similar styles. Because when you have a team that has a lot of similar DIS styles, doesn't matter if they're a lot of Ds or an Is, it doesn't matter, but you have a lot of similar styles, two things will always happen. The first one is the team will begin to amplify the strengths of their behavioral style. So let's say we have a team of a lot of C style. Now the C styles are really kind of feeding off of this similar behavioral style energy. You are analytical, I'm analytical. You did some research last night at home and you found all these interesting facts. I'm fascinated by these facts. Hey, I want to look into this a little bit more. And now we're analyzing together, having great time doing it, but we may miss the big picture, that why we are doing this and what we should actually be doing. So we amplify our strengths. The second thing is we also tend to amplify development areas, but I want to focus on the strength part on this webinar. And in a team setting, it becomes a bigger challenge because it's easier for me to change my behavior. Only thing I can control is how I'm going to behave, how I'm going to modify. But it's easy in a team situation where we are similar styles that we get lost in this positive energy of being ourselves. And even if I begin to realize that, hey, maybe I should modify, it becomes more difficult for me to modify my behavior because nobody around me is likely to reinforce that change. Hey, don't change, just let's analyze together.
Right.
So that happens in team settings a
They're
lot.
actually going to reinforce the amplification of the behavior. It's almost like a catch-22. It just gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah, team level changing that is a lot more difficult than on an individual level.
So it's good to know. Strengths, not only can you overuse them as an individual, but when your group or your team comes together, that itself can amplify the strengths to a point where, again, it becomes a weakness.
Yeah, that's it. Always happens in teams, and the challenge is that how do we actually together decide to do something about it rather than changing behavior at the individual level. And when we look at this thing is that when we are under pressure and we are feeling a situation where we are frustrated and we may be fatigued, really what happens, like you just mentioned, Christina, is that we revert to our natural style. And when we revert to our natural style, we really stop modifying our behavior and we begin to demonstrate the negative traits of our behavioral style. And extended disc assessment will identify for everyone what those are. And for Suzanne, for example, maybe she aims to change too much. And really what these are, these reactions to pressure situations, I use them as a red flag for, not only to myself, but I recommend others look into this section, that these are the red flags that maybe I am exhibiting behaviors that are not the most productive. And it helps me really to get the awareness that now I may be better off doing something else. Now might be the time to kind of slow down for a moment, think about how I should modify my behavior and not let emotions take control. Strong emotions are really kind of the enemy of behavioral modification. It's always more difficult to modify behavior when we're feeling strong emotions. Frustration, anger. Think about, last time you had an argument with a friend or a family member. And when we get angry, it really becomes very difficult for us to modify behavior. We really become ourselves. And not only do we become ourselves in a positive way, we really begin to demonstrate the negative traits of our behavioral style. And of course, that angers the other person. And guess what? That person is not very motivated to modify their behavior. So it creates an atmosphere where the behavioral modification is really difficult to do.
I always say, well, maybe it's better if how would you treat a stranger? How would you treat someone you don't know? A little bit different, wouldn't you say?
It's an interesting thing because we can meet somebody, a total stranger. Let's say I go to a networking event this afternoon. I meet somebody for the very first time. I don't know anything about them. I may never see them again. However, I'm going to be at my best behavior, meaning that I'm really going to be thinking about how should I communicate. I'm trying to identify the person's style. How should I modify my approach? And I'm really spending a lot of energy making those adjustments, hoping to get the best outcome. Maybe later that evening I go home, and now with the most important people in my life, my spouse, my family members, kids, and I forget about all of this behavioral modification. I'm tired, I'm frustrated, and I'm not really being very present and aware of how I should modify my behavior with the most important people in my life.
Yeah, well, maybe there are modifications, but we need to be consistent about it. So can you talk a little bit about just how different styles show up when in terms of when they overuse their strengths?
Yeah, I'm just going to give you a couple examples when we are using our strengths too much. And let's, of course, start like we usually do with the D styles. D styles, they can be very decisive. And we know they make decisions quickly and comfortably. But they also, when you combine this with their desire to be in control, they can become very close-minded. Maybe the team members, maybe their direct reports, maybe their colleagues could really have some valuable input for the D style to make some better decisions. But no, I'm overusing my strength. I decide quickly, so forget about you. Also, D style is very direct. Of course, like in the story I shared a little while ago, if the person becomes too direct, they can become very blunt. And of course, if you're being blunt with others and being insensitive, feelings get hurt, guess how others are going to react? Probably not very positively. And of course, when they react that way, the outcomes are not going to be as successful as they could be. These styles, very competitive. Well, when they take this competitive too far, they become abrasive. Again, not a behavioral trait that is very conducive to success. So awareness for D style is that when I'm overusing my strength, this is how I may come across to others. Again, it's the awareness.
Just
if you're not aware,
self-aware.
you're just going to overlook it, and you're just going to get frustrated, and you're going to be using your style even more.
Yeah, they're thinking they're being very decisive, but perception is now they're being closed-minded and steamrolling over.
That's right. iStyle. Well, one thing I really love about iStyle is their enthusiasm. I mean, it's just contagious. They are very positive about everything, so they can really promote those ideas and get people thinking about all the positive outcomes. However, when they take it too far, others may see them as being unrealistic. So if iStyle is presenting this idea very enthusiastically, maybe they're not getting the kind of response right away that they were hoping to get. Well, now I say, well, what am I doing wrong? Maybe I'm not being enthusiastic enough. So they're becoming more so. And other styles, especially C-style in the room, begin to shake their heads and say, this is not real. This is not possible, unrealistic. iStyle, of course, very optimistic. But when they take it too far, what happens? Others may think that they're exaggerating things. And again, that will hurt their credibility. The iStyle may be seen a little flaky and not kind of grounded in reality, and others are not going to react in a way that iStyle obviously would want them to be, others to react to their ideas and their new initiatives. And finally, this is another example. Of course, we could talk about many more, but just one more about ICE. They're very social, but when they take it too far, others think, hey, they're not following up. They're not really coming through on their commitments and promises. So if you're not, these are some of the things kind of be aware of to make sure that you don't be too much of your iStyle. Make sure that you keep it in check. S-styles, one thing that people love about the S-styles, they're calm. If they want a Powerball today or their dog died last night, you can't tell the difference. They're the same calm, steady, laid off. So, but that calm as well, it can be very soothing and nurturing. Others may also see it as being complacent. Maybe just we want to see some kind of reaction, and you need to be careful in S-style not to be kind of too laid back. And speaking of laid back, that behavioral trait by others can be seen, hey, now you're just being too passive. You're not really taking enough action. You are just kind of a spectator here, and that's obviously not a good perception for others to have. And one more, they're very supportive. S-styles always put their needs behind other people's needs. They're always thinking about others, but when they overdo it, they actually themselves become kind of resentful. They suddenly begin to feel that people are taking advantage of me. Now, one thing about S-style is that even that they are feeling emotions-driven behavioral style, they don't express those feelings very clearly. So others are typically not aware that they might having feelings of resentment, and S-styles really are not very good at demonstrating those and letting other people know how they truly feel.
Till they blow up.
Then they become very D-like. Others say, what happened? How did that come from? There are no warning signs for that. And finally, with the C styles, they're analytical, but when they take it too far, others see them as being critical. You're always being so nitpicky. Or when you're so precise, you take it too far. Hey, you're being too indecisive. You need to decide. There's not always all the information available, and more information is not going to improve the quality of our decision, perhaps. And sometimes making a faster decision is important to make absolutely perfect decision. And of course, C style is very disciplined, but when you take that too far, others may see you as kind of rigid.
Well, great. That just kind of gives us at least, understanding that we have behaviors, and even the behaviors that are described here, even when we overuse them, if we ourselves are that style, we may not be aware that we are. We may just continue to see ourselves as analytical, precise, and disciplined. Is that right?
That is correct. Now here, and I'm going to talk about a couple of things that will help us make sure that our strengths do not become our greatest liabilities. But when people get emotional, then it's difficult for us to see it. So the key here is always awareness. If we are aware of what we are doing, then we, absolutely, of course, can take some corrective action, if you will. But when we are overusing our strengths, like you just said, it's hard for us to really understand we are doing it. Mm-hmm. So instead of focusing on the behaviors, I'm going to focus on a couple of things. And one is that when you're feeling stress, when you're feeling pressure, those are the situations where you are more likely to overuse your strengths. So as a takeaway, if you're feeling stressed, by the way, we stress all the time, but when you're particularly feeling more stress, just realize that now you are in the danger zone of overusing your strengths to the point that they become your weaknesses.
And emotions come out.
Yeah, the emotions, like I said, kind of an enemy of behavioral modification. When you begin to feel frustration, anger is another strong emotions, so realize that you are particularly vulnerable in being in a situation where you are using your strengths too much and also not really modifying your behavior, because when these emotions become strong, our motivation, our willingness to modify our behavior just goes out the window. It's not there.
And fatigue does it too.
Yeah, fatigue. Hey, I have to think about your day. When are you most likely to modify a behavior? Hey, most people, when they come to work, full of energy, that's when most people are at their best. They have new day, new opportunities, and later in the afternoon, things have changed. The fatigue will set in, and if you realize that when you are tired, that you need to really particularly pay attention to your behavioral modification. Now, you may think, well, that's a really big challenge because I'm tired and now you're asking me to do more. Well, that is true. However, if you don't pay attention and if you don't modify your behavior, guess what? The results are not going to be the ones that you're hoping to achieve, and then things really gets even worse for you. So we need to make conscious decisions about our behavior. And sometimes when you're kind of thinking about, should I do this? It may be helpful for you to think about what is going to be the cost of not making that adjustment. What is the cost of arguing about the dishes tonight versus actually just doing the dishes? What is the cost of not modifying my behavior with my colleague? What is the cost of not adjusting my sales approach with my prospect? If you keep that in mind, sometimes it is easier to be motivated and willing to make those modifications. And lastly, think about the value of the interaction. What is the value of modifying your behavior with your daughter or your son or your spouse or with a good friend? Then you begin to realize, hey, it's not so difficult. It's actually worthwhile.
Keep the end in sight.
Right. Rather than focusing on those emotions and feeling, focusing on how miserable I am right now because of stress, focus on what is the outcome that you actually want to achieve. Then it's a lot easier to modify your behavior. And let me.
Oh, sorry. Any techniques for that?
That's what I was give some techniques, and some of these are very simple on bullet points, but they're actually very difficult to do. One of the key ones is to slow down. If you are a, let's say, S style, count to 10. If you are D style, count to 2.
Yeah.
Do something to slow down.
Yeah.
And really kind of help yourself keep calm. Try to control those emotions and really kind of almost kind of step out of your body in a sense that, hey, what is really happening right now? What will happen if I continue with this kind of being on autopilot? What's going to happen if I don't adjust our behavior? And when you keep that end goal in mind, like we just talked about, it's a lot easier to adjust your style. It may be how you lead others, how you sell, how you communicate, how you interact with your family members. And then it becomes a lot easier to make sure we don't overuse our strengths.
So it's one thing we really just need to acknowledge that how we see our strengths when we're overusing them does come out in a different behavior that usually is a negative or becomes a weakness for us. Is that correct?
That is correct. And the challenge with this whole topic is that when we are talking about strengths, and strengths, that's a positive word. Why not use our strengths?
Exactly.
And you combine that with the fact that these are behaviors that are easy for us. So it's like we talked about the autopilot to take over. It happens so easily. But when you let that happen, the outcomes are never what you want them to be. So it's really worthwhile to try to slow down, be present, be calm, be centered, being very mindful about how should I modify my behavior to be more successful.
Well, thank you so much, Markku. Thank you all for joining our webinar. We have a couple more coming up for you. Well, this one will be recorded, so if you didn't get a chance to listen in all of it, or you have someone else that would benefit from listening on it, it will be posted on our website along with this PowerPoint. We do have a couple webinars coming up. We have one coming up next week on how to use our support materials and a tour of our VIP client resource site, which has a lot of great information, PowerPoints, exercises, webinars, etc. And then Marku will join me again on September 5th at the same day of the week. It's a Wednesday, but a new time. It's going to be at 1 o'clock Central Standard Time. And we get this so much. What is the difference between extended disc versus disc? So we will cover that topic because I'm sure you guys as trainers and consultants also get that question. So thank you all. We will get to your questions. For those that you have posted it, we'll send you an email or we'll give you a call. Thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Marku.
Thank you, Christina.
All right. Take care, everyone.